name Chanel and this is Unfiltered. The question for today is, do you think voting should be mandatory? Why or why not?
No, I don't think it should be mandatory because it is your right and it's your choice. What if the options are not what you would like? I don't think somebody should force you to choose what you don't want to choose. So I think it should be non-mandatory and leave it at the person's choice whether or not they're going to vote or not.
Throughout the entire universe, people normally vote, right? We're supposed to vote for a better constitution or constitutional right. But because of all the things that's going in Jamaica, most people don't want to really vote because they want to see better. And most people say they're not seeing anything for them to vote for. So most people lay back and don't want to vote, but I think we should vote for better.
It should be mandatory because everybody complain. So you can't complain to the road full of pothole if you never vote for somebody who did go fix the pothole. Everybody will feel it. Once upon a time, crime and violence only did affect downtown and the garrison. Now Cherry Gardens have to have Zozo and everybody have to have a camera and everywhere for grill up. So why not vote?
Voting shouldn't. It's supposed to be free willingly because it based on all you see if a person can run a country I don't fit enough. So if me not see you fit enough run country, me not go by what you say, me not go do what you say. Me not go by nothing what you say. So basically it's up to me if me want to vote for you, yes or no.
No, I don't think it should be mandatory. You should have your free will because God gave everybody choices. All right? So you have a choice to vote or not to vote.
No, well, I think you should have a choice. You should have a choice to choose who you want. Or if you don't want, you're supposed to have your choice to do that.
Time now for the Business Report with Denise Williams.
Welcome to today's Business Report. I'm Denise Williams, here to bring you the stories shaping the financial world and guiding your journey to smarter business decisions. Let's dive into the top headlines. The Bank of Jamaica generated net profits of $21.6 billion on total assets of $1.24 trillion during the 8-month period ending August 25th. The central bank says its total assets for the period included foreign assets of $998.7 billion and total assets of $244.9 billion. Additionally, circulation climbed by $600,000 to $259.1 million since the start of this year on the JAMDEX digital currency. The bank adds that JAMDEX now accounts for less than 1% of the total $273 billion in circulation. Natalie Haynes, Deputy Governor of Financial Markets and Payment Systems, says the slow growth of JAMDEX means more effort is required to promote its use for day-to-day transactions. For the trading period ending August 28, 2025, these were the most actively traded stocks. Investment house Sagicor Select Funds Limited Financial shares with 6,010,795 units traded, representing 14.19% of market sales volume. Online education firm One-on-One Educational Services Limited with 5,001,371 units traded, representing 11.81% of market sales volume. International hardware distributor Fosrich Company Limited with 4,644,310 units traded, representing 10.96% of market sales volume. We now shift our focus to the Forex market rate set by the Bank of Jamaica. On August 28, 2025, the Bank of Jamaica reported US 61 $58.45 million purchased and US $58.32 million sold by Forex traders. Forex traders earned $1.61 per dollar, selling the US at $160.92 and buying the US at $159.31. The Canadian dollar netted Forex traders 80 cents per transaction, with selling at $117.30 and buying at $116.50. The British pound yielded Forex traders $1 in profit, with selling at $217.37 and buying at $216.37. For our credit report tip of the day, many people underestimate the power of their credit score until it costs them. Ignoring your credit report isn't just a small oversight. It can silently drain your finances, block opportunities, and create stress you don't need. Understanding your credit score is the first step to taking control of your financial future. Here are a few ways ignoring your credit score can hurt you. Lower confidence in money decisions, difficulty accessing personal lines of credit, missing the window to rebuild after mistakes, losing valuable time that compounds into lost wealth. And that wraps up today's business report. I'm Denise Williams, reminding you that every financial decision is a step toward your future. Until next time, stay focused, stay informed, and keep striving for success. See you soon.
In regional news, Cuba has joined Venezuela in criticizing the presence of U.S. military assets in the Caribbean, calling it a threat to regional sovereignty. Havana insists the deployment is less about combating drugs and more about exerting power, while regional leaders remain cautious in their response. CNC3 News has the details.
Cuba's voice has been added to the chorus of criticism on the presence of U.S. military assets near Venezuela. The Miguel Diaz-Canel administration declares that this move poses a grave threat and stands as an aggressive display of power against the sovereignty and self-determination of Latin American and Caribbean nations. Cuba argues that while the U.S. is telling the world that their military presence is an offensive move in the war against drugs, that is far from the truth. Cuba said the U.S. is infamous for these false narratives and added that the Trump administration is resorting once more to lies to justify its violence and plunder. Cuba said the U.S. is not fooling anyone, insisting that the military arsenal deployed in Caribbean waters can never be solely intended for narco-terrorists. Cuba said the Americans are looking to turn the Caribbean Sea into a battlefield, adding that no reasonable person could believe the scale of U.S. troops, combat equipment, naval forces, including nuclear submarines, and firepower deployed in the region is a legitimate way to combat organized crime, drug trafficking, or irregular migration. And the Venezuelan ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago is welcoming Cuba's support. Alvaro Sanchez Cordero told CNC3 News that they sincerely appreciate Cuba's support about the contradictory U.S. policy on its response to the war on drugs. Now, CARICOM has not said anything as yet on these developments in the region. St. Vincent and the Grenadines Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves told CNC3 News that CARICOM Chair Andrew Holness may be consulting with individual members first. However, he said that this U.S.-Venezuela standoff may not be a priority at the moment.
The truth is this. I mean, I don't know if it's the biggest issue on the agenda for CARICOM at the moment, you know.
Meanwhile, CNC3 News sought a response from Guyana's government after Kamla Persad-Bissessar offered this country as a base for the U.S. if Venezuela moves against Guyana. Its foreign affairs minister said that has not been discussed much on a government level as they are in the midst of an election. However, he did say it's a position that he respects and every sovereign nation has a right to determine its own self-interest. Akash Samaru, CNC3 News.
A high-level security conference is underway in St. Lucia, bringing together financial intelligence units from across the regional security system. The goal, to strengthen cooperation and to develop a unified strategy to disrupt organized crime by targeting its financial lifelines.
We need, as what I would say as well as a regional security mechanism. A high-level strategy conference is currently underway in St. Lucia, bringing together the financial intelligence units, FIUs, of all 8 member states of the Regional Security System, RSS. The meeting aims to craft a unified action plan to dismantle criminal networks by tracking the illicit flow of money and targeting the masterminds at the heart of organized crime.
To learn from each other and share experiences in terms of how they are addressing money laundering, how they are addressing asset recovery, and how we can have more proactive approach to addressing the increasing crime rates that we are seeing across the region.
Keisha Sutherland, a key figure within the asset recovery unit of the regional security system, is tackling some of the most pressing challenges in identifying and addressing financial crimes.
When we think of financial crimes, we think of just money laundering, for example. However, what we have been, or the motto of the asset recovery unit, is to take the proceeds out of crime. As we would recognize, we have different motivations. Myself, I go to work and I am thinking that, 3 months of not being paid, I would probably not show up the next month. And I think similarly, criminals have a motivation for being involved in crime. And usually, if we look at most of the crimes that are committed, that is because there is a gain attached to it.
Sutherland draws a clear line between various levels of criminal activity, revealing how their interconnectivity creates a dangerously fertile ground for syndicates to thrive, whether it's drug trafficking, human smuggling, or cybercrime. She notes that the common thread is almost always financial gain.
When I say guns are being made, we are seeing 3D printed guns, or you have weapons that would have been designated for other use being then recalibrated for use as actual weapons, right? And the point that I want to make is that you're seeing that increase in those guns or weapons because persons want to protect a turf, for example. And that is in relation to probably drug trafficking. And so our motto will help law enforcement and other authorities in stamping out crimes or reducing crimes, because our approach is that you're taking away that motivation from the person. So if you take the funds away, hopefully, then they wouldn't have any funds to perpetuate their criminal activities, and you would be removing the motivation.
A gnawing concern, Sutherland notes, is the growing trend of incarcerated individuals continuing to wield significant influence over gang operations. Even from behind prison walls, they manage to orchestrate the movement of contraband and illicit funds, exploiting loopholes in the penal system to maintain control.
However, when we are able to remove someone's criminal property, we know for sure that they will not have the capacity to continue to do that. Because one of the things we have also recognized is that, look, the persons who are outside, who might be under the control of a gang or control of a particular grouping, they continue to do that because they are being influenced. They are dependent on the funds that are coming from this person. And so that is why even if we have incarceration, it will continue. So I think when we think of this meeting, I think the short would be that it's an opportunity for us to strategize as financial intelligence units, specialized investigative units, to actually address the crime rates, especially as it relates to financial crimes.
As crime syndicates grow more sophisticated, stakeholders are sharpening their focus on financial intelligence as the frontline weapon in exposing and disrupting organized crime.
In sports, we look to cricket. West Indies under-19 captain Joshua Dorn says the squad is ready to embrace the challenge of Sri Lanka in a 7-match youth one-day international series, which bowls off on Saturday, August 30 at the Coolidge Cricket Ground in Antigua. The Barbadian batter recently guided his country to the regional under-19 title while earning the tournament's MVP award. Dorn also has international experience as part of West Indies' team at the 2024 ICC Men's Under-19 World Cup. The squad has been acclimatizing in Antigua for the past week with a series of practice sessions under head coach Rohan Nurse designed to sharpen their skills ahead of the opening contest. Dorn notes that the spirit within the camp was especially encouraging while highlighting the importance of discipline and adaptability. A 4-member contingent from the Trinbago Knight Riders franchise, which included C.E. Venki Mysore, paid Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar a special courtesy visit. The visit came after TKR's historic victory over the Antigua and Barbuda Falcons on Wednesday at the Brian Lara Cricket Academy. TTT Sports' Adrian Lazar brings us the details.
Following an 8-wicket victory over the Antigua and Barbuda Falcons in their first home match of the 2025 CPL season, a Trinbago Knight Riders contingent of CEO Venki Mysore, Business Operations Manager Kyron Surratt, Head Coach Dwayne Bravo and Captain Nicholas Puran visited the office of the Prime Minister for a meeting with Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar. During the visit, the 4-member TKR contingent presented Mrs. Persad-Bissessar with a team jersey with the initials KPB. Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister and Minister of Public Utilities, Barry Padarath, was also presented with a TKR team jersey with the name Barry. The Prime Minister, on behalf of her cabinet, praised TKR on their victory over Antigua and Barbuda and expressed full confidence in the team's capability. She also extended best wishes on behalf of the nation. Adrian Lazar, TTT Sport.
And that's it for the weekend news. Pleasant viewing.
The following is brought to you.
I've been talking to Mariel already on so much that we can do together. So I'm looking to build partnerships with the Caribbean creative community, government bodies, cultural organizations, and African hubs that are interested in taking this to the next level. And then short term, I would like to do a pilot of CADCA. Even if it's not this year, we would love to do it early next year when the next cohort of ADCA starts, and run training and exchange programs. It would be beautiful to take some Caribbean musicians to Africa and also bring some Africans here and do some really cool exchange programs. And then long term, obviously scale through festivals as big as this, run digital campaigns and collaborative music projects with tech and AI, which is now a big thing. So the key things I would like to leave and also to add to the conversation that we are building on now is that music is the strongest connector of Africa and the Caribbean. Also, digital content creation is our biggest media platform. It's free. It's just on your phone. You just need to figure out the ropes around it. And you don't necessarily have to be an influencer, but you might be able to get your message out there, even if it's not related to music. And then lastly, well, not lastly, we're looking forward to having intentional collaborations because those are quite sustainable beyond policy. Those can even drive policy to be put into place just because there's no way to ignore it anymore. And then lastly, we need to tap into our shared rhythms because we are very much alike. Yesterday, I was telling a friend that every time I come to the Caribbean, I see somebody that looks like another person back home. And some of our expressions are very similar to Africans back home, and it's so uncanny and it's so interesting because some of us have never been, some Caribbeans have never been to Africa, and some Africans have never been here, but when they meet, it just feels like we've been hanging out together, and you can see that it's years of genes and shared history over time. So why not we build a shared future together? So yeah, let's reshape our culture together with collaborations, leverage on digital content to amplify it, and let's take it to the max. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bernard. And how wonderful that we've been able to start with this really successful current example of what happens when musicians who are using this new ocean, as you refer to the internet, and thanks so much for this wonderful, powerful metaphor, people who are tapping into this new connectivity in ways that are really generative. So I'm going to speak to, I'm really glad Bernard in many ways has spoken to the new music economies, the ways in which digital economies are making new kinds of connections possible. And what I think is really exciting about having this conversation at this time is that these new economies have not displaced, but they've added to the economies that really are still centered on musicians playing together in real time, in person. And we're needing to think about how those economies link to each other. So I'm going to ask that we play the next video, please, and then after that we'll go to another PowerPoint, and we're going to be looking at another case study from Southern Africa, and I'll be speaking to some of my colleagues' experiences in that. And so this is a video that documents the first decade plus of a project called Concerts SA, Concerts Southern Africa. And basically, for just over the last decade, we've been quite deliberately trying to build live music circuits at the local level, but also at the regional level, which I think is going to resonate in interesting ways here in the Caribbean. Thank you.
Action.
Where the live music scene is today wouldn't be quite where it is at the moment if it hadn't been for the support and initiatives of something like Concerts SA.
What's important about this program is that it speaks to what music can do for educational purposes. It speaks to what music does for entertainment purposes. It speaks to what music does for individual well-being.
Other countries, there are foundations that really help musicians to create and not worry. So to get something like this is very important so that people can take the music to the people.
I got digital mobility funding in the thick of COVID where we were hungry, guys. Yeah.
It helps the nation understand itself. It helps us feel better about who we are, and it helps us become more of who we are instead of living in small, frightened cages.
It can be really tricky when you're making music like for the artistry of music, but at the same time you have bills to pay.
You were my friend and you called me love.
Because the beast itself is designed to put us in competition, shrink the soul of the song, not care for the vessel. The vessel is always under threat.
Dreams, that's all there is.
As a living, very tough. You have to be strong. It really can't be okay if you're not using your gift. I believe a gift unused becomes a curse. You want to allow your creativity to just go big.
Music is not just cerebral. Music is deeper than that. It's what you are.
It's a healer. And we need to nurture it because it's vital that we create spaces for music to be able to blossom and heal.
We as musicians have a very important role to fill in society. We're like healers of some sort. We're therapists.
We need to sell the truth about the importance of something like this and get support for it.
I believe that if Concerts SA were to disappear, there is nothing in the wind that would replace it.
If we get to a place where we don't have that, I'm a little bit scared.
So thank you. As you can gather, it's been a really important project that's supported all kinds of music. We heard jazz, Afrofusion, choral music, classical music, and so that full gamut. So Concerts SA began, and if I'm going to see if I can just control the slides. Excellent. Concerts SA began in 2013, and it was in fact a collaboration that was funded by colleagues in Norway who had had experiences building live music circuits in Scandinavia. Africa is obviously a very different setting for that. Distances are greater. Deep colonial histories and histories of deliberate division by design in a country like South Africa had to be overcome. And live music still is, as we've heard elsewhere today on other panels, a precarious thing. One can't just assume that the venues that support it, who often do so without subsidy or without any other form of economic support, that they'll always be there. A festival is a gift because you can't ever be sure that next year you're going to have the same sorts of resources available to produce. So a project like Concerts SA set out in 2013 to try and build a more sustainable ecosystem for a range of live music performances. But as I've said earlier, Bernard speaking to the digital becomes super relevant to the story because, of course, in 2020, although not by design, the crisis around COVID meant that Concerts SA had to grapple with the opportunities to try and move live music into a digital space. So you will see that the project offered work opportunities, not only for professional musicians, but for the whole ecosystem that supports live music, technical support, media support, but it doesn't stop with the gigs themselves. You would have seen from the video that there's a very deliberate attempt to develop audiences and socially inclusive audiences, given histories of exclusion within South Africa. Digital mobility became a huge aspect of this work, especially after COVID. Supporting audience attending in small venues, in rural areas, in peri-urban, peripheral areas, and not only supporting big live music venues. And it's a project that's sustained by partnerships. These partnerships are transnational in terms of funding arrangements, but also lots of workshops, lots of local support. The sharing of skills has been an important part of this project, and it's involved all 9 provinces within post-apartheid South Africa, but also importantly for us, and I think especially for today's conversation in the Caribbean, 11 countries in the Southern African development community. It's been very productive for a project like Concerts SA to start building networks where musicians can start in South Africa or end in South Africa, but perform in Eswatini, in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in Mozambique, in Zambia, and in Zimbabwe, and so on. So that's what the project has involved. And over the 10 years that reached 2013 alone, really upwards of 26, almost 27,000 opportunities. We've been doing research at my university as to what the decade of support tells us in terms of how live music venues have shifted, what kinds of activities have predominated in terms of genre, in terms of geography. So close to 4,000 concerts, nearly 2,000 venues and spaces across those geographies I mentioned. Lots of educational opportunity. Nikki Sondo is in fact a very wonderful venue owner in Johannesburg. If you come to Joburg, Nikki's Oasis is a wonderful place to catch live music in. And she speaks to the ways in which schools programs link with her work. And she recently has actually reached out to me because she wants to study as a postgraduate student her professional experience. We've also been able to move colleagues and musics into digital spaces, especially at a time that artists couldn't perform live in 2020 and 2021. And we've built a lot of workshops, skills sharing, the kind of work Bernard does. And we've reached out to schools in terms of audience development. I'm part of a small team that works with Concerts SA as a group of researchers, because we think that analyzing who's been applying for funding, what kind of funding they've needed, and the shifting needs and nature of the sector helps us to develop policies and recommendations within South and Southern Africa that we hope we can also offer to a conversation with colleagues here in the Caribbean. There have also been really important studies, for example, on gender representation in the music industry and the particular challenges that women face working in the nighttime economy, in a range of spaces, and what kinds of interventions can be made for gender equity in the music industry, where a lot of work remains. So Concerts SA is a really exciting project that helps us to build on the South African and Southern African experience, and especially something that I'm very passionate about in my own ongoing work as a cultural producer come lecturer, is to be very deliberate about building audiences that enable intergenerational and inter-community conversations. As I said earlier, South Africa for over 40 years was divided by design. Apartheid literally meant in the Afrikaans language separateness. And so we had cultural and educational and political policies aimed at preventing people from getting to know each other culturally. So the work of redress in post-apartheid South Africa is about being very deliberate in allowing the young artists and audiences who are coming up to see themselves as part of a greater, much more diverse and much more integrated story. And that's something we can tap into Caribbean experience in very meaningful ways. So I'm going to thank you for your attention and invite further partnerships with this kind of work. And we're so grateful to CARIFEST and for the big conversations, for indeed inviting us to think big about being very deliberate about doing this now. In 2025 and 2026, there are so many opportunities, as Bernard has demonstrated. So thank you sincerely. And with that, I'm going to just acknowledge, I'll pause to acknowledge the work of Andre Leroux and my colleagues at Concerts SA. And now we're going to move to our other panelists, but I'm going to invite much interaction from colleagues in the audience. And of course, we're also very grateful that we have an online audience for this wonderful series of big conversations. So I've been delighted in the last 2 weeks to firstly online meet Nicholas and to be able to really get a sense of the kind of ways in which artists, professional artists, are navigating careers here in Barbados, and in the larger ecologies of the region and indeed the larger world. So please join me in welcoming Nicholas, who will be responding to what we've been discussing. And Nicholas, with that, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Nicholas Branker. I was originally born in England, but don't hold that against me. I grew up in Barbados. I am a Barbadian through and through. These two gentlemen have given us a wealth of information, which I think we can try our best to utilize and take advantage of. It is important for me to give you a little sense of what my history is. I have been a professional musician / producer for my whole life. I have never had what people call a day job. I have always supported myself. It is important that I say that because there are not very many of me. When we think about the Caribbean, we have CARIFEST, we speak of the Caribbean as a place. The Caribbean is a region full of countries whose populations are vastly different in terms of number, in terms of economic power, and in terms of access to resources. So when we speak of the Caribbean and then we speak of Jamaica, it is unfair to Dominica. It is unfair to St. Kitts. I know that I have to speak sometimes what appears to be negatively, but it is practically. I think that the smaller islands in the Caribbean are suffering from a lack of non-political artistic investment. I think that it is important for us to recognize that all of the music that we're talking about, all of the music from Africa and from the Caribbean, is rooted in the struggle for freedom. It is a political statement. It has always been a political statement. We use it commercially in order to generate resources for ourselves to further our fight for freedom. So, governments have either tried their best to suppress artistic expression, or they have tried their best to fund it in order to control it. What I find is problematic in terms of developing a really fertile artistic environment, what I find problematic is that most of the largest avenues for exposure are controlled by government, which affects whether you think it obvious or whether you think it subconscious. It affects what is said. It affects what is represented as artistic expression. And I think we need to think about ways, which is why I was listening to you gentlemen very carefully, and it sounded to me, even though you weren't really fully specific about it, it sounded as if your funding was outside of the political spectrum, which is a crucial thing. But you have large societies, so it is maybe easier to get that done. I think it is an important point for us as the artistic community to think about ways that we can generate resources that are not attached to artistic control. I think, for example, of our carnivals, which we perceive as being the most amenable avenues for musical expression. But they are extremely limited in what they allow or what they can promote. The music is very specific, and because of its specificity, it is difficult to export it. But the amount of time and resources and energy that is put into it, I think it is counterproductive. I would like for us to think about ways that we can firstly have year-round musical creation, not seasonally specific musical creation, because in a lot of ways, what we make for carnivals is much like what we make for Christmas. It is played for 4 or 5 weeks, and then it has no value after that. We may love it because we love it, but it really only has 5 weeks of commercial value. That song that you are talking about, that you did, can last 4 years. I think we may have 10 songs in the last 40 years that we could say that about. I'm not talking about Jamaica right now. Outside of that, maybe 10 songs that we can speak of as being legitimate commercial successes internationally out of our musical environment. To me, that's not really a good sign, considering that we put out thousands of songs every year, regionally. The second thing that I want to say is that for my own personal warm part, as we say in Barbados, I am committed to the increase in quality of the musicians that we produce. I also find it important that we give them a sense of where they fit in the relay of this musical life. A lot of young musicians in the Caribbean do not know the musicians that came before them. They do not understand the struggles that they had. They don't know what their artistic statements were, or what their artistic direction was, or what the environment was that they came out of that caused them to do what they did. My work, I have a band. I am functioning as an NGO, but I have a band. We have 3 generations of people in it. Well, 4 really. There are people in the band that could be my grandchildren. I shouldn't have said that. It's not that I am old, it's that they are young. But the point is that I tell them about things that they have never heard about. Things that happened in Barbados about musicians that grew up in areas that were very similar to where they grew up in. They don't know who they are. I have another kind of configuration where we have musicians from the Caribbean playing together in one unit. There aren't many of those units. In fact, I don't think there's another one where everybody is from a different country in the Caribbean playing music and exploring one another's rhythms. Those are the things I would like to see more of, so that we would have, I think, a more valid statement to make when we get to a place like Ghana, when we get to Africa. We have more to say because we have a greater sense of what makes. We are very similar in many ways, which is a good avenue in, but we still need to be different in order to have viability, in my mind. And I think that we need to spend more time in this region working on that. What happens at CARIFEST doesn't happen any other time, in my mind. And CARIFEST happens once every 2 years for a week. And we all come and we are all excited and we all talk about all the possibilities. And then 2 years from now, we will be having these same conversations again, because we go back to our regular lives and to what we do daily. And the feelings of collaboration and togetherness that we have now, we need to find ways to sustain, maintain, and develop. Out of that, I think we will begin to create a much more vibrant artistic community that is more diverse than it is now, and therefore more scalable is the word that economists like to use, and bring more revenue into this part of the world, more attention to this part of the world. But it is a work in progress, and I hope that in my lifetime I will get to see a much more all-encompassing approach to artistic development and remuneration. So that's my point for right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. And so we'd really love to hear from anyone who's in attendance who may want to add to the inputs we've heard, or to ask questions, or to offer suggestions for alternative futures. And I think where Nicholas has ended up is really important for us, how the energies of something with as long a history as CARIFEST, how one can build these more sustainable circuits for both live and virtual performance. That seems to be the key. And it sounds fantastic to me that you have those intergenerational dialogues and intercultural dialogues happening within your band, and that certainly sounds like something that we'd love to hear more of in Africa. Would anyone in the audience like to pose a question, offer another perspective? We really value your presence and your attention. May I ask, within this kind of space and this kind of conversation, If one were to, outside of festival time, visit not only Barbados, but the region, where would one go to find the places where the intersections happen between musics of the African diaspora, you know, in a broader sense? It does strike me as an opportunity that this panel is having a conversation across hemispheres. Are there places anywhere in the Caribbean where, outside of the context of a big festival?
I don't know of any. There is a lot of collaboration on the internet, right? There is, well, I shouldn't say there's a lot. It depends on where you go. There is collaboration. I know of Trinidadian people that are doing collaboration with people in Africa, and I do know it in Jamaica as well. I know in Dominica, there is some connection. And definitely in Martinique and Guadeloupe, who are French speaking, there's a different kind of connection altogether. But it is not, I wouldn't call it a movement. It is sporadic, it is not consistent, and I do not know that it is like a model that can be followed. I think it is based largely on personal relationships that were developed over time, you know, from like historical connections between musicians or whatever it is. I think the fact that it is so difficult for us to move from one island to the next makes a lot of the collaboration that we would want to do, the physical collaboration, extremely difficult. It is cheaper in some cases for us to get to the United States than it is for us to get to another Caribbean island. And that is problematic because, as you would very well know, most artists are not wealthy. And so how you do that kind of physical collaboration is difficult. But as I said, you know, the festivals are brought into being, and they do provide a template, but the amount of resources that is required to put on like this CARIFEST, I mean, we can't do this every 6 months. You know what I mean? It is impossible to do. So we have to find ways to maybe reduce this singular expense and spread that investment over time so that it has more longevity. And that's just my thought.
Very interesting. Please, Dr. Barrow.
Hi, good afternoon. So, of course, the conversation has been intriguing so far. And while I am not, you know, my background isn't solidly in music, I wanted to share some examples from other subsectors that I think are potentially instructive. So in the visual arts, we have spaces like Tilting Axis and Linked, where they do regional residencies. And this brings Caribbean artists together to dialogue, to, you know, engage. They also share, you know, they also do conferences at various locations at various times. But this is done through international funding for the most part. And it really then becomes about whether the individuals or the organizations that are doing this work are able to secure that international funding, and what are they leveraging to be positioned in this way. Again, I don't know much about music, but that's how it happens, or how it has been happening in the visual arts over the last, you know, 7 to 10 years, perhaps. And it has been really, really effective. I mean, even on the last panel, we heard the introduction to one of the panelists, and it said, I'm a Tilting Axis fellow, right? And so he was speaking specifically to that institution that has been built around the region. So I don't know what the possibilities are for music, but I suspect that they are greater, because music has more popular appeal than the fine arts and visual arts. So I think there's so much that we can draw on and build on from there.
Thank you. And of course, as you mentioned that example, I think where an enormous opportunity lies is, in fact, collaborations across those kinds of spaces. Galleries are wonderful places for live musicians to play in, and vice versa. And we don't have to take the kind of canonical separation of genres as a given. That's one of the wonderful things about festivals is that they do actually encourage us to make art of all kinds in spaces of all kinds.
Good afternoon. My name is Stetson Wilshire. I wrote a few songs in my time. I've worked quite a bit with Mr. Nicholas Wanker. Nicholas mentioned something earlier about the fact that there are not many like him who was able to survive only on music. What do I say to a young person about getting involved in music when clearly here in this region it's extremely difficult to make a living from music?
Well, I can only tell you what I did, right? I mean, if you look at music as a service industry, you can survive in a certain way. Barbados is a hotel tourist destination. There are a lot of hotels. You can get work in hotels. You can work, you know, reasonably consistently for a large part of the year. You can earn a reasonable living. But what you will be playing is what the tourist expects, which is a very specific kind of musical expression. It is not. You wouldn't be able to call yourself a creator. You would be able to call yourself a creative, in the sense that you'll be working in a creative industry, but you will not be creating per se. Most of the people that come into this want to be creators. They want to make a statement and they want to have an avenue to exploit it. In this time, I think that you are really going to be having to think of yourself as a world citizen as opposed to a Barbadian. You're going to have to think about, I can't just make music for the people that live around me. I have to find a way to make what is unique to what we do palatable to a larger audience. And then we have to find ways to do like what Bernard is doing in terms of leveraging social media in a constructive and viable way, which is also very difficult from this part of the world given the kind of agreements that we have with the platforms, where it is not as easy to generate income as it is in other parts of the world. But it is going to be a struggle, and you're not guaranteed any success. You know, most of the younger people that I meet say, well, I want to sing a soca song so I could get in crop over, and then hopefully I would get a hit, and then I could sing in Trinidad Carnival, and I could sing in whatever, and do that little circuit for a year. That happens maybe to 2 people, if that. You know what I mean? So what I try to encourage is that you think about being a master of more than one trade. So if you want to write music, you can write music, but you also have to be able to interpret music. You have to be able to play an instrument. If you want to sing, you shouldn't be just a singer. You should learn to play an instrument so you can accompany yourself. Because a lot of the singers don't actually know how to play anything. They can't accompany themselves and go and sit down in a bar or whatever and write your own songs and perform them and generate a kind of your own little fan base in a space. And it's little things like that that you have to try and do in order to make yourself marketable while still making a statement that is of value to you. Am I making sense?
Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, everybody. This question is directed to Jambu Spaces. My name is Taja Julian. I'm from the island of St. Lucia. We're known as the Fettin country, where we have St. Lucia Jazz, there's Grosley Friday night, so we have our people all immersed in that. we are actually creating a space called Engulf. Engulf is a space for artists, and we're looking to collaborate. And I was so thrilled to hear the way Jambu has put together like collaborations across the region and just getting everybody excited. Today I could see the song Shake It to the Max. Even our Minister for Sports is dancing and singing that in Parliament office when he does a big deal. So it's like Shake It to the Max. So we all know about that. So what's exciting is that dance can be applied and you have the Afro beats right in there. And that's exactly what we are, Caribbean people. So my question to you is that, how do we use that space to pull our young people? They don't want to hear much talk right now. They don't want to hear no history. They just want to make some money. Yeah, they want to shake it to the max. So when we say, we need to listen to them and understand what they mean, because instantly you could become a success. Just like in sports, music just drives you up in terms of your earnings and what you could do, your popularity in minutes, that can happen just because of the internet. But the problem that it's not a problem, it's something that can be fixed. And how do we, if we have a space already, how can we use it virtually to do a collaboration? How can we collaborate virtually in our space, the Caribbean countries around, joining the Afrobeats? Because we have a space already. It's called Engulf. Yes? And how do we collaborate on a virtual basis? Because we know to travel from one, at some point we can meet, we can do those big events like what we have here, and it will cost us some money, but it's worth it. You know, our sponsors that we get, it's worth it to them. So I want us to think out of the box right now. I want us to embrace that opportunity, especially if seeing you there, Jambu, right? To really make it happen, because I'm not, like the young people at UE right now should be here to really, because when I heard the tune, I was like, okay, there we go. Something that I know about, and I know the dance too, because it comes with a dance virtually. Everybody's doing it. Yeah, so there's a communication going on there. So that's my question for you. I want a virtual space for us to collaborate. That's my calling.
Okay, so I mean, it looks. Thanks for the question, first of all, and I'm also curious to know more about Engulf, right? Yeah. So after we're gonna talk, but it looks right now. It looks so good. Like as you watch the video, and how like Molly is a big artist now, but it wasn't something that happened overnight. It's a journey, and in creating spaces like what you've created, you need to accept that it's going to take some time for it to build up. I remember we're in our third year, actually. I remember in our first year, I had people walk up to me and said, why are you spending so much money on, or why have you dedicated this building to this? Why won't you turn it into apartments and rent it out? Because that's the big thing in Ghana now. And I said, I have a vision, and I know it's a space that people are not focused on, but I also know that with time and me constantly showing up and proving a point of what I'm trying to do is going to build the community. Spaces like ours are very dependent on community, and you need to wait it out. But the end goal is to have quantity, right? A lot of people that you're impacting. But in the first few years, you need to focus on quality, not quantity. So even if it is 5 people who show up for a workshop that you've created for 100 people, if 2 out of that 5 go out later on and follow through with everything that has been taught and have become super successful, they become a case study for all the others who are eventually going to come. So for example, with Molly and Shake It to the Max, people know and are familiar with the fact that a lot of them know her from being at Jambo Spaces, creating content there, and she posts about us every now and then. So we have an influx of people who constantly now want to participate in our academy, in workshops, in master classes, just because of that one case study of Molly. Nicholas said something that over like 1,000 musicians who put out music, 2 of them might become successful. And it doesn't mean that it's not a viable space. It's just that they need to start thinking of other ways in which they can make music beyond just being a hit artist standing on stage with 1 million people standing in an audience. But there are other ways you can write for people, you can do other things. But back to the matter, I think you need to wait it out and we constantly show up. Whatever you've been set out to do. I don't know how long Engulf has started, but I was in that position that you are like worried about now, of not having like a lot of people showing up for things like that or looking to tap into the opportunities. But wait it out. Even if you're talking to 5 people a month, I mean, it burns through your resources, but if you can find a way to keep showing up, one single case study or one single successful young person who benefited from your space or can talk about how Engulf changed their life or made a difference will bring in 10 more. And it's now, currently for me, it's quite easier to get people to engage with Jambo Spaces because they have seen evidence of people who are successful. When I say, oh, I'm from Jambo Spaces in Ghana or Nigeria, people say, oh, that space that did, or that space that did that. And the emails are becoming more, the conversations for funding are becoming more, and it just gets easier. Just like any business, traction is what shapes what you want to do. But you're right, digital is the best way to even scale further, but you need to first make sure that you impact a few people that are coming, and then with time it will catch on. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, so I have 2 thoughts. The first question is speaking more to what Nicholas would have touched on earlier, where when he talked about the Caribbean, he said the Caribbean is rubber stamped as the Caribbean, but we're a very diverse region. I believe that Africa suffers the same thing. People say Africa or Afrobeats, and we kind of brush Africa with one brush, but it's a huge continent with so many diverse cultures within it. My question is, and I know you asked earlier if there is a space where we as a region kind of meet outside of these big festivals. I want to know if in Africa, like you have Jambo, but is Jambo specific to Ghana or does Jambo reach other nations within Africa itself? And then are there spaces where there are creatives that meet outside of festivals that happen in Africa? Have you been able to manage or find spaces? And Africa is huge. So I know that even being able to travel and all that is also difficult. So virtually, etc. Is there a space outside of festivals where the creatives kind of collaborate outside of that? The second question, because I don't know who's going to answer that first one, but the second one speaks to, well, we use the example of Molly Shake It to the Max, but I do believe that a large part of Molly's success outside of having that musical collaboration that was genius was also that we are now a very visual world, and TikTok is very visual, and along with the music comes the dance. She just spoke about her minister dancing. So as big as the movement was with the music, I feel as though like the dance aspect of it also played a major role. And a lot of her viral moments happened from all the dances that she was taking to the streets, etc. And just a food for thought in terms of how do we then branch beyond the music itself and then look to work with the other creative industries, whether it's the fashion and what music we put behind the fashion, or how do you push your song with the person that's already having a collaborative space in fashion and add your music to that so that every time somebody sees that your Caribbean song is behind that, etc. So I'm just thinking in terms of collaboration outside of regional collaboration, but how we across the different areas of the arts collaborate.
The first question was, oh God, I remember. I can't.
If other countries collaborate.
Yeah, so Africa suffers that same thing with what he said, because we are 54 countries, all of us very different, very nuanced. when I was building Jambo with my co-founders, Jambo is a Swahili word. Everyone in Ghana asks me, why are you using a Swahili word? We don't speak Swahili. But it's just because of my vision of eventually impacting the whole continent. And Swahili is the biggest African country, spoken African country, language in East Africa and some parts of the South. So in my thinking, if it blows up the way I want it to blow up, at least the widely spoken language it's going to relate more to it. So I am not even a quarter way to impacting the whole of Africa with Jambo, but it's still part of the vision. So I think it's okay to. Currently, we are serving Ghana, but with time, I'm eager to have more Africans tap into it and grow beyond Africa and even get into the Caribbean. Also, I don't think that is necessarily a problem with sometimes people, how they call it, encapsulating the whole continent or the whole Caribbean as one. This is my thought, if one country excels, it pulls the entire continent with them. If, for example, Jamaicans are, from my point of view as an African, we see Jamaicans as the loudest and most vibrant and everything. And even up to now, I'm still learning about some Caribbean countries. But when I'm thinking about the Caribbean as a whole, whether it's Jamaica that was championing something or not, I embrace the whole Caribbean as, oh, you guys are doing amazing. I don't think it's a bad thing. And I think we can leverage and ride off the successes of our neighbors to be able to tap into things that will also benefit us. When you speak about places in Africa that do things outside, let's say, Jambo or festivals and stuff like that, there are a lot of things like that in Africa. Nigeria has their big thing. South Africa has a lot of big events and things that bring creatives together, and East Africa, because like I said, we are very different. For example, Ghana has something called Dirty December. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's like a pilgrimage of people from the diaspora coming into town and just coming to party and do a lot of creative and cultural things for like 2 weeks. When I go somewhere, when even another African goes somewhere and they say, "Oh, you're from Africa. Oh, do you know Dirty December?" And they claim and latch onto it and use it to sell or push whatever agenda that they have. So I think it will take a while for people to recognize each Caribbean country for what it is, but it's also okay for us to ride off the successes of our neighbors to be able to push our agenda, because you never know. Because someone likes dancehall, they might be drawn to soca and be drawn to something that is unique to a specific Caribbean country. What was the second question?
Before you go on, the reason why I brought that up was not specifically as y'all are describing it. What I was talking about was the fact that, Dominica has less than 100,000 people. As a nation, it's 100,000 people. So there are musicians in Dominica that need to survive off of 100,000 people, right? And that is what I was talking about. So if you talk about the Caribbean, economically speaking, there's a wide disparity between what is demographically big and what is small, so that you can't think of the opportunities in the same way. The possibilities in terms of what you're speaking about actually do exist, but the average person who wants to just survive has a different challenge. And that's why I was speaking about it, because we don't always think about what impact the size of the geographical space and its population does to the possibilities for success in the business. That's what I was really talking about. Because I'm sure that festival you talk about for 2 weeks, more people go to that than live in Dominica and St. Lucia.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean? So it's like, when you think about the scale, it's a whole different way of thinking. And we have to try to think about that, but also be realistic about the environments in which we are functioning. Because We just don't have those types of resources. But we have to think about how we would kind of allow for that and compensate for it, you know.
Yeah. And to touch on the last thing you said, I totally agree with you about the cross-selling of various creative arts and how they can support each other. I don't know if any of you have gone to see Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa, the theater thing that's showing by Chief Movement. Chief Movement is from Ghana, very good friend of mine, and he's been doing this for years. An example, Mansa Musa is a good example of how poetry, fashion, music, and film come together in one production. And that's a good example of how we can cross-sell each other. Because, for example, if Mansa Musa goes to the kind of heights where it's on Broadway and is being shown in like beyond even like in like bigger markets, it can get to a point where labels might come to him and say, hey, we want to plug in maybe this song by Beyonce in one of the scenes because your thing is so big and people are constantly watching it. And that's an avenue for him to make money. That's an avenue for him to also amplify other people's music in the space and his commercial approach. So, yeah, I think we should be creative. We are creative, so we should be creative about how we can tap into other avenues. If it is fashion, whatever it is, that can push whatever agenda that we are pushing as a creative person. So, yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think it's something that we should explore.
Please, sir. Thank you very much. I wanted to say something about the scale issue that Nicholas is referring to. One of the things that I perhaps would like to ask of the others is, are there not musicians who come from small towns or villages who face the challenge that Nicholas described for people from a single country, in our case, a sovereign state, but who are operating on the same sort of scale that a small town in one of the bigger countries have? And I presume what they do is they migrate to the urban center because it's all within one sovereign state. So is it not just a question, Nicholas, of mobility within the region that hampers somebody being able to grow as a musician when they originate in one of these very small states?
I mean, so there are musicians in Barbados who are from other islands who work here. It happens. My point was that there are people who can't do it. And I have met people who have phenomenal talent who just, we can't get them, you don't know how to get them out, right? And I think about how, so it's one thing to do, you do a little video and people see it and they say it's great, but the physical presence is a problem. And I also think that what happens a lot of the time is that we don't really, I don't know how your incubators would work, right? But a lot of our performers do not get to perform regularly. So their performance skills are not developed. So when they get a popular song, they're not ready for it, right? Because they live in an environment where they're maybe like they're working in a studio with somebody and you sing the song and you may sing it 2 or 3 more times, but it's not like you're not on a stage every day. You don't have an audience in front of you all the time to try and learn how to work a crowd, how to build your stage presence. All of those things are things that used to happen as a matter of course because, like how you said, in the 70s and the 80s and even in the 90s into the 2000s, there was a lot more possibility for live performance because people were able to perform much more. There was more venues. There were more bands. There was more of an economy that supported that kind of thing. And so a lot of people, like, for example, I mean, I'll give you a very basic example. There's somebody that I worked with the other day that had a song that was popular, And I said, well, come and work with us. And we were doing a show. And I said, well, okay, so you're going to sing the one song, but then you got to sing 2 or 3 other songs. He's like, well, what? So how long are you all performing? I said, like, well, maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes? But that's a long time. And at the end of the 20 minutes, they were hoarse. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like how you democratize the resources across the Caribbean so that people in islands that don't have opportunity feel like they do and can develop the skills that are necessary. You know, it is that I'm thinking about.
And if I could perhaps just ask a different question, and that's about diversity. Because one of the things I think we've had in the region is quite a significant diverse creation of different genres of music from the different communities and cultures that all find themselves in this region. But I'm not sure that there has been as much cross-collaboration between those cultural genres as there probably could be. Or perhaps I'm wrong in that it is because of that cross-collaboration that all these genres are being created. I wondered what your thoughts are about that kind of cross-cultural collaboration. Well, all 3 of you involved in the industry.
I just spoke.
So thanks for the question. And again, you know, given South Africa's history, we, for example, have an extraordinary history of jazz musicians, many of whom were forced into exile under apartheid and have come back. And there's an incredible newer generation of musicians, but the audiences are not intergenerational. So it tends to be an older audience for jazz. So there are some deliberate projects on the go right now to try to bridge that divide. And of course, the full range of improvised musics can talk to one another musically. And festivals can also be really wonderful, fecund kind of platforms for that. The way that musicians can be commissioned to produce something new that will speak outside of the boxes that are seen to be, you know, mutually exclusive. Most musics are families of other musics, but the ways that they're marketed and the platforms for them tend to be quite segregated. So it does take some deliberate creative and also marketing backup. And because you're a marketer, I'd love to hear your opinion.
I think I was going to touch, as he started speaking, I was going to touch on no matter how small a place is, or no matter how unique a sound is, if it's good, it's going to cross borders. A good example is even South Africa. They have a sound called Amapiano. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Amapiano. Amapiano started in South Africa because South Africa had at a point was so big on house music, and I think they started adding like the keys to it, and it became its whole thing on its own. And it was just like one DJ who started it, and now Amapiano is like played across the entire continent of Africa, and even in the US and wherever. Yeah, my whole thing is, I don't think like a country needs to be, no matter how small a country is, or no matter what collaborations that come out of different sounds, if it's good and it's marketed well, it is going to make the impact that it's supposed to make. Young people are very impressionable people, and in the advent of TikTok and Instagram, if you're able to market or create trends or create viral moments out of whatever sound it is, it would catch on, and before you know it, people will start trying to replicate it, and it becomes a trend. So, I mean, that's a good thing about the youth, and that's a good thing about understanding how they think and positioning musical material for them to jump on. It is an art that is tough to crack, but I mean, that's what we teach at Jambo. That is how we try to get into the minds of these young people and see what can get people taken. Like Molly's dance is just a very simple dance that she covers her face and she winds her waist a little bit. And we realize that people who are shy and don't want to show their face but still want to dance will still do it and cover their face and do it and put the video out. And it caught on like wildfire. So it is not cut in stone or it's not specific science, but there's a lot of chance to it, but you can keep trying until it works out. But it's not impossible to, yeah.
Okay, so I would like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
So I'm glad that Bernard spoke about music crossing boundaries or borders. You can hear me? Yeah. So my question is to Nicholas. So Carnival was born out of resistance and of the enslaved people against the brutalities of slavery. And so it carries a deep history of defiance and resilience. So you know when Bajan say, if you say A, God say B. So my question therefore is, how then do we preserve and balance that cultural foundation when in an effort to generate income, we move away from art forms rooted in Carnival?
I don't think you need to move away from the art forms rooted in Carnival at all. I think that it is about authenticity. It is about sincerity. It is about honesty of expression. Whatever that is, right? I think there are always layers. There are different levels of a thing. So what we call pop music that generates all of that income is an offshoot of a more serious music, all the way down to whatever the nut is, that seed that gave birth to everything else. It becomes more and more diluted the more accessible it becomes. But the root is always the same. I think where we as a people have a little bit of a challenge is the lewdness of what carnival music can now be is offensive to some people. I think that is because we don't recognize that generations continually have to push the envelope. So if we as adults don't have no problem wearing skimpy costumes and walking up, and then the younger people who come after them have to do something more, because that's just how it works, right? And so I think that we need to encourage, and this is why I was saying earlier, with everything that I said kind of comes back around, about how involved the leaders or the governments are in what is being expressed, because they can't really be involved in promoting excessively lewd lyrics. But there is a market for it. And we can't say that you can't make it, right? But if that is what is selling, because I was reading up to yesterday in the Guardian in England, they were talking about some of that bouillon music that is a little bit risque, that is doing, like, had Notting Hill confused, but it's not something that people can talk about, because it's like, well, you can't really say that you're promoting this kind of lyrics. But it is a natural thing for us to express ourselves in that way, because that too is part of the resistance. It is about us being comfortable with ourselves and with our expression and the way that we feel about our sensuality and our sexuality. You know, people are pushing boundaries just because they feel it is important for them. So you got to let them express themselves. But at the same time, I think that is where, like, the foundations that are responsible for the development of culture should fight to preserve the essence or the original expression. Like how, for example, you would have the Kennedy Center in America preserving classical music, and you have the New York Symphony Orchestra, which is funded, and you know, like, people who, those things can't function as economic enterprises on their own. They are supported by the state, And those are the things that we should be thinking to support. And then let the young people just do what they're doing. And we follow them and see where it goes, I think.
Follow-up question. Nicholas, you had mentioned about artists making music for the world.
Yeah.
What exactly then is music for the world? Because if I had to highlight one of your biggest songs, Raga Raga, in my opinion, it was basically a social commentary. You know, I don't understand one thing when I try to listen to one dancehall.
Right.
That's basically speaking about the infiltration of dancehall on the Barbadian society.
Right.
So then what is music for the world?
I said it just now. It has to be authentic. You gotta be saying that people believe you are saying. That song is 32 years old. It is. It was a whole different time. The way people listened to music was different. What people expected from music was different. What is big now is a whole different kind of music. And you have to sell. You gotta sell a culture. You gotta sell a way of life. You gotta sell an aspirational kind of existence. And so I'm not caught up in what the song should be about or how it should be structured. I am caught up in the authenticity of it and the sustainability of it, the ability to try and harness it into a movement. So you don't just have these one song here and another song here and another song there. You try to do it in a way where there's a movement, like how hip hop was a movement. Like you had a whole set of people that just were doing this thing, and it became, I mean, like the voice of the world in a way. It is really about trying to harness that kind of creative potential and make it feel like a movement, so that it has a certain kind of lifestyle surrounding it, and people then buy into that. You know, 'cause I mean, like reggae music is not just about reggae music. It's about, you know, the way they dress and the way the hair is and the herb and the Rasta thing. It's a whole existence that, you know, we have to think about how you package things.
So I think that Nicholas has, in a way, brought us full circle to where we began, thinking about how deeply rooted musical expression can be, even as it circulates transnationally now in the blink of an eye on that digital ocean that Bernard so beautifully described. It's clear that there's enormous vitality, but still depth and history in these practices, tied to histories of resistance and histories of self-liberation. And I think that message the music carries in ways that are forever fresh and new and compelling. So I want to thank you all for your attendance, for your participation, for your thoughtful questions. We certainly would love to continue to dialogue with you. You know, since those big festivals that I mentioned at the outset, since CARIFEST began in 1972, and we had these big Pan-African festivals happening, like FESPACO and like FESTAC, festivals were spaces of play and creativity and art, but they were also spaces of discourse, of reflection, of taking stock of where we are and where we need to be. So it's really wonderful that CARIFEST 15 has reinforced that aspect of the festivals. Thank you to Dr. Barrow and to her team for curating this really important series of big conversations for us. We're clearly touching on big issues that need ongoing engagement. And we thank you, and with that, let me thank you all and wish you well for the remainder of CARIFEST 15.
Na, 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 na. We want a peace for Jamaica. Yeah, yeah. We have to be our brother's keeper. Yeah, yeah. Jamaica live good, yeah. I make we enjoy life. Want we feel safe at night. Jamaica live good. I better you and I. No say we future bright. Jamaica live good. Come together as one. I make the violence the world.
Jamaica has more than 28 species of birds, land snails, reptiles, amphibians, and hundreds of flowering plants that are only found in Jamaica.